Hey Tony, it's Friday. First off, to answer your question of the week, no, I haven't watched any of those specific iceberg videos that you mentioned. I watch a lot of analysis videos, but as far as the iceberg video goes, no, it's not something I watch. So originally this week I was going to make a fun video about different genres of music I've been listening to and what they say about our culture. But then, the state of Oklahoma happened, as did the state of North Dakota. So instead of talking about a fun, lighthearted video about music, let's talk about nullification and states' rights.
Boo!
You see how everyone is thrilled to hear this subject. So, for some context onto why I want to talk about this, is this. So, earlier this week, the Oklahoma State House passed a bill that basically let the state say that a federal law is unconstitutional. That's called nullification. So nullification is a legal theory in which it's based on the 10th Amendment, which basically, and I'm paraphrasing here, all rights not directly mentioned in this Constitution are the rights solely of the states. And so the theory on that is nullification, that states have the power to determine if a federal law is unconstitutional. Now there's a lot of legal paperwork on this in saying why it's not, and there are a lot of cases that say you're wrong. But the main one is due to the Supremacy Clause in the Constitution, which in essence just says the federal law is supreme to state law. So your state laws can't necessarily deem a federal law to be unconstitutional, but a federal law could determine a state law to be unconstitutional. Supremacy Clause, it's one of the big things you talk about in con law. So the fact that Oklahoma is doing this is interesting and really doesn't have a legal leg to stand on, but it's particularly fascinating because of the history behind nullification. So nullification first has been a theory since the Constitution was written. James Madison and Thomas Jefferson had, in many regards, tried to mark federal laws as unconstitutional via their state legislatures of Virginia. And again, it was still unsettled ground there, so there's not a lot of case law about that. But what really happened, the really big thing that happened, was the Nullification Crisis during Andrew Jackson's presidency. So the Nullification Crisis, in a complete SparkNotes version, is there was a tariff that John Quincy Adams passed that the South really hated, because it put extra tax burdens on agrarian equipment that was taken from outside the United States. Which, when the South had an agrarian economy, that was really bad for them. So they determined it was just an abomination. The tariff was the worst thing in the world. And when Andrew Jackson was elected, they firmly believed that, oh no, Andrew Jackson's going to get rid of this terrible tariff. And he did, but he didn't. He passed a new tariff that passed through all northern state legislatures and half of the southern ones. But the state of South Carolina was particularly adamant of no, this is not okay. The state of South Carolina was particularly important in this whole drama because Andrew Jackson's vice president was John C. Calhoun. John C. Calhoun was from South Carolina. And this led to a serious division between John C. Calhoun and Andrew Jackson. And it actually resulted in South Carolina starting to talk about secession. Now, it never ended up happening because what ended up happening in the end is that Andrew Jackson ended up passing a different tariff that South Carolina deemed okay, and it just kind of went from there. So fast forward 130 years, I guess really 100 years to the early 1900s, and you start to see nullification was completely deemed not to be okay during Andrew Jackson's presidency, but nullification started to morph into the idea of states' rights. Now, states' rights had been a thing since, again, the very founding of our country. The Articles of Confederation was all about states' rights, and it was not effective. But states' rights, as time went on, became more of a dog whistle for predominantly segregation, but other things that, southern states didn't like the federal government overreach in. And this kind of manifested in Governor Wallace's famous speech of segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. And he ended up coming back years later saying he regretted the fact that he didn't say states' rights. That just shows just how combined those things are. And we're starting to see a lot more states' rights arguments being brought up involving COVID restrictions, involving gay marriage rights and things like that. And it's really interesting because with Oklahoma passing this law, it's them trying to set forward the fact of we can nullify federal law. Now, there's going to be a case about it. I honestly do not believe it's going to last judicial review because there's too much case law against it. But it's going to be interesting to see, even though I do firmly believe that the law is unconstitutional and will be deemed as such even by the Republican Supreme Court we have now. But so that's kind of the really quick SparkNotes version of nullification and why it's interesting. So Tony, my question for you is, do you remember learning about the Nullification Crisis back in APUS? Tony, I'll see you on Monday. Later, bro.